Everything you always wanted to know about Blackrock in under 30 minutes. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I am your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Blackrock Investments, Blackrock CEO Larry Fink. We've heard of Blackrock and Larry Fink, especially recently, and he's become sort of the boogeyman in American politics, at least for those on the right side of things. And by right, I mean right thinking side of things, to say conservatives, patriotic Americans, Republicans, and so forth. And there's a good reason for it. He's quickly taking over where George Soros in his elderly days are waning in influence. And Larry Fink with Blackrock is somebody that we need to watch out for, keep on our radar, and fight. Thankfully, Republicans around the nation are fighting back. More on that in a second, but I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app. That's the online platform for all your faith-based podcasts. You have to go there and check it out. You really do. Billy Hallowell, one of my friends, has an excellent podcast there. Lucas Miles has an excellent podcast there, and many more. You may also get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com. Scroll to the bottom of WashingtonTimes.com. Look for the newsletter section. Click on it. Look for Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. Sign up, enter your email address, and you will get delivered to your email box Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all the commentaries that I write all day long at the Washington Times, as well as my Tuesday and Thursday podcast. And guess what? While you're signing up for that newsletter, why not sign up for the Washington Times' newest faith-based newsletter, Higher Ground? Within the newsletter are commentaries, are news articles, and podcasts, even some video podcasts, video logs, whatever, or videotaped interviews, all dealing with news and culture and the education system and economics from a faith-based perspective. And yes, you can find Bold and Blunt there because, as you can tell, it's a perfect match. But guess what? If you like Bold and Blunt and want to subscribe to Bold and Blunt, you can also just do a search engine search on Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. It's available wherever podcasts are offered. Let's talk Larry Fink and Blackrock for a second. You've probably heard in recent times how Blackrock has been really killing the free market in America, right? By forcing those who do business with Blackrock, and that's about anybody and everybody, it seems like, to agree to Blackrock's far left vision for the world of politics, the ESG goals, the environmental social governance standards, where we all have eventually a China Communist Party type social credit score that dictates what type of activities we can participate in, as far as travel, as far as shopping, as far as going about our usually free business. This is what they do in China, right? Everybody has to show that they have that little green check mark in order to, say, go buy something at a store or go to a place of entertainment for a few hours. And what's interesting is that if you go back in time, just a blink, right, under the coronavirus shutdowns in this country, there were certain areas, certain jurisdictions, certain Democrat, always Democrat. It's always got to be the Democrat. You know, the world would be a better place without Democrats. I just got to say that. But anyhow, it was always the Democrat-dominated areas that tried to put in place these little social justice type standards where you had to show before you went into, say, a restaurant or went into, say, a sporting event, that you had the government mandated, government dictated, government imposed COVID shots. I don't call them vaccines because, come on, a vaccine, you get a vaccine, you expect not to get what the vaccine is supposed to protect against. But how many people have taken the COVID shot, not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but 4 times and ongoing. They're all geared up to take it again every year. They want to stand in line and get the booster, the next booster. How many times have we heard stories of people who have taken these shots, Jill Biden, for instance, and then turned around and gotten COVID again, right? So how is it a vaccine? All right, different discussion, different day. But Larry Fink and Blackrock is all in line with the type of mentality in America that sadly showed itself under the coronavirus, that wants to force people to take certain actions that they may not want to take as conditions of doing things that they shouldn't have to ask permission to do. You want to go into that restaurant? Show that you have a check mark on your COVID shot. You want to invest in this particular company? You want to put your pension dollars toward this particular investment? Well, that particular investment under Blackrock, Larry Fink's orders, also has mandates that in order to participate, you have to show that you are in compliance with, say, net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050 or by the year 2030. And so it's all about forcing people to do things that they don't really want to do in the first place. And they don't want to do them because they're thinking Americans and they know that it's all about control and power, not, say, as with the case of net zero carbon emissions, not about keeping the environment clean. Because if it were about keeping the environment clean, then this same company, Blackrock, under Larry Fink, would not be doing business with China, that refuses to participate in the exact same kind of environmental ESG controls that Larry Fink imposes on American businesses, right? On American governments doing business, doing pension business with companies related to his fund. So it's hypocrisy, right? But what it really is, it's all about King Larry Fink deciding that he knows best for the world how the world should behave. And it's not even that he cares so much for the little people of the world, it's that he cares much, much more for himself. You know, there are a lot of people out there like Larry Fink, right? Bill Gates is the same. Bill Gates with his pandemic controls and is working with the World Health Organization, scratch that, meaning dictating to the World Health Organization how pandemic controls should go forth, and working with China and chastising America that we weren't more like the communists in China, shutting down complete freedoms of their citizens, right? We should have gone China's way and just completely locked everybody in their houses, right? That's Bill Gates's view of things. And then let's not forget Anthony Fauci, the ones who aren't as rich as the Bill Gates and Larry Finks of the world, but just lust and quest for the same type of power and control over the people. It's not about concern for the average Joe and Jane. It's all about power, control, and just ruling the world. A select elite few at the top ruling the rest of the peon class, the 99.9% peon class, and us in the peon class doing the bidding of the elites, sometimes without even knowing we're doing the bidding, which is what makes Larry Fink and Blackrock such a peril. If Larry Fink were a politician that we voted for, we could just vote him out of office, but he's not. He and his free market Blackrock company operates sort of as this shadow influence, this shadow government, doing the bidding of the far left. And when I say far left, I mean communist far left, right? Tyrannical, dictatorial, far left, almost Democrat. So we don't vote for him, we don't elect him, and yet he runs practically the free market in America, though there has been some backlash in recent years in Republican-dominated states, and that is good news. So that's an overview of Larry Fink, and BlackRock. And my guest today has much, much more specifics about how this guy works, how his company operates to undercut all that's great about America, all that's free about America. And in many instances, you probably aren't even aware how deep he is in with communists in China. And he is busily trying to bring that communist style of economics, of business to America. Open your eyes, America. I know that you've heard of Larry Fink and BlackRock, but my guest today, Hild, has the inside scoop on all the stuff that you may not have heard of. So you want to listen up. Will Hild, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is really great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about BlackRock. What is the problem with BlackRock?
Well, how long do you have?
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just saying I agree.
So BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world. It manages about $9.1 trillion of investment dollars, depending on the day of the market. And the main problem is, it uses that money, and again, that's not their money. That's American investment dollars from state, local pension funds, university endowments, people's 401ks and retirement plans. It uses that money to push a far-left progressive agenda throughout all of corporate America. It's basically trying to set environmental and social policy here in the United States without ever facing a voter or a ballot box or the democratic process of accountability. And that's the main reason that BlackRock is an issue. We can go to many myriad ways of which that translates into negative effects for consumers across the country, for our national security vis-a-vis China. But the core issue is that BlackRock thinks it's their job to use your money to push their politics.
Let me get this devil's advocate question out of the way, because the same thing is said of the social media giants, right? Twitter, before Elon Musk, Facebook, and so forth. And one of the issues I did not like early on about the conservative viewpoint of big tech's takeover of free speech, right, was that they were calling for government intervention basically into free market companies. How is the BlackRock thing different? How is it different that BlackRock still is a private company, but should be criticized for what it's doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we run into a lot. Here's the major difference. When Google or Twitter before Musk, well, Twitter after Musk as well, when they make a decision about who to have on their platform or not, or what's appropriate to say or whatnot, they're using their assets. That's their company run by their executives making decisions for themselves. BlackRock is using money that doesn't belong to them. And we have rules that go back to English common law. These are 300, 400-year-old rules called fiduciary duty. What they basically say is that when you're investing money for people, it's the same duty that your lawyer owes you or your doctor owes you in many circumstances. When you are acting on behalf of a client in the investment space, you have to focus on their returns and their interests, not your own personal politics. And so that's the issue here, is that you have BlackRock inserting their own judgment and their own political objectives in place of the profit motive duty, this fiduciary duty that they owe to their clients. The other issue is much of the dollars that they manage, as I mentioned before, are government dollars. These are state, local, and federal pension funds. These are university endowments, public university endowments. And I don't think anyone who believes in the free market would believe it's okay for government money to be used to push a political objective. And that's exactly what Larry Fink and BlackRock are doing. So that's the difference. You're not only is Larry Fink and BlackRock violating a legal duty that they have in the market, but they're also using government dollars to push a political objective, just like we would object if it turns out that Texas retirement system was using its money to try and get certain people elected or to push social policy. We should be very upset when we find out that Larry Fink and BlackRock are using some of those same dollars to push social and environmental policy in the United States without facing voters.
Very good. And also they're going above and beyond that, right? Because what you found in your research is that Larry Fink and BlackRock are actually helping along the Chinese Communist Party with their investments. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that really is happening in two ways. Some of the most direct is that BlackRock has invested in a number of different companies that make spyware, make software, make hardware for the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. Many of these companies are blacklisted by U.S. agencies for trade with U.S. persons. So, for example, there's certain communication companies that you cannot buy as an American. You cannot buy the products of these Chinese communication companies because the evidence is that they're really just spyware. You put up a cell tower with them, or you put up a Wi-Fi router with them, or something like that. They're just sending information back to the CCP. BlackRock has investments of many of those companies, and just a couple weeks ago, we saw the House Select Committee on China take a look at those investments and the ways that they're helping build really the spying and military capabilities of a country that's probably our biggest geopolitical foe and someone we might be in a hot conflict with. I'm sorry to say, in the foreseeable future. That's the most direct way. But the more indirect way, I think, is even worse. And that is, it's talking about these, when I talked about, BlackRock trying to set environmental and social policy, they're doing it through these ESG scores and metrics. What they mean is they're going into, a broad swath of the American economy, corporate America, and they're saying they want them to hit net zero targets. These are incredibly damaging things for corporations to focus on. Instead of serving consumers, it's about lowering their carbon emissions to zero by 2050. That's going to increase costs for consumers. It's going to hurt shareholders. This gets to that fiduciary duty issue. They're actually harming the companies whose stock they hold for their clients. So they're supposed to be making money for their clients. They're using those stocks to actually lose money for those clients. But here's where it gets to the China piece. They aren't pushing any of those same targets in China. Number one, China wouldn't let them. They would immediately get kicked out the moment they started harming the Chinese economy the way they're harming the U.S. economy. But in addition to that, they get a lot of special favors from the CCP for putting investment dollars into China. And so the net effect is that BlackRock's investments put American companies on an uneven playing field when they're competing with their Chinese counterparts. And as you know, more and more of business is multinational. It's global. We're competing, car manufacturers and oil companies. They compete, in markets across the globe with Chinese car manufacturers and Chinese energy companies. And so when you have a company like BlackRock managing stocks and going to Exxon and Chevron and BP and saying, hey, we want you to do this, we want you to make your investments and your operations, less profitable, less efficient. You're going to cause increased costs for consumers. But in China, they'll, finance coal power plants and finance natural gas pipelines and natural gas power plants. The net effect is to help build up China's economy while it's tearing down America's at the same time.
What do you know about Larry Fink, the person? Have you done research into his background? What motivates him? Where his mindset is during his business dealings?
Yeah, well, clearly he's an incredibly ambitious person. He has sort of been he's kind of like the Forrest Gump of economic disasters. He was heavily involved in the creation of mortgage-backed securities, which led obviously to a big part of the 2008 financial crisis. And because he'd been so heavily involved in creating this, nuclear bomb that went off on our economy, he was actually brought in by the Treasury to help unwind some of those issues. And that's actually one of the major ways that BlackRock built their business, is they got a huge chunk of the better portion of the assets, the part of the Toxic Asset Relief Program, the TARP program. He got a sweetheart deal for BlackRock during that period of time in order to help, in return for helping the government unwind the very thing that he'd helped create. So that's just some of his ancient history. But more recently, this is a guy who I think has ambitiously built his company to have a huge amount of AUM, assets under management. And then in 2017, he's on an interview with DealBook. This is a New York Times property. And he's being interviewed, and he brags in a now infamous clip that at BlackRock, they believe that if behaviors are going to change, and in this case, he was talking about race and sex-based quotas or boards of directors for companies. So in other words, you got to put so many women on and so many black people on and so many gays on. He said, we believe that if behaviors are going to change, they have to be forced to change. And at BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors to change. So I think this is a person who's incredibly ambitious, but also incredibly power hungry, and believes that it's his right or his responsibility to dictate the way in which you and I are going to live our lives, despite never running for president, never running for any higher office. Just simply by being a Wall Street fat cat, he thinks he should be in charge of how corporate America is run, and by that, the way you and I live our lives.
Here's what I don't get about people like Larry Fink, because you can make the same case, the motivations of the big tech people and other corporate bigwigs in America as well. The very system that allows them such great success is what they're actively, in the end, going to destroy. Do they not see that? Or do they just think that they're so smart, they're smarter than the average bear, that they will be the ones at the top when it crumbles?
Well, I think that they would say that if they are in charge, it will never crumble. And you see this in a comment that, again, another infamous comment that Larry Fink one time made. He said, markets, he was on CNBC, and he said, markets, they don't really like democracies. Democracies are messy. They prefer totalitarian governments where things are for sure.
Interesting.
And I think that's a very telling comment because, one, it's incredibly historically incorrect. If you look at the core, historically, where have been the places where capital formation has been famously centered? It's been London. It's been New York. It's been Paris. It's been in mainly European democratic or constitutional monarchies with the parliament countries, right? It has not been in Moscow during the Soviet Union, right? It was not even in China previous to their economic reforms that allowed a limited form of capitalism. Capital formation and markets have been exclusively the purview of democracies, right? So what does that suggest? That for somebody as educated and as knowledgeable as him to say something so incredibly incorrect, what I think it really speaks to is that Larry Fink prefers totalitarian governments. He would much rather deal with the Chinese Communist Party, where they can tell him, here's the rules, right? And we're going to dictate the rules. Here's how our people are going to live, and we can dictate that. Then in a country like America, where the people get a say on how their lives are run. Now, Larry doesn't like that. Larry would much prefer that someone like him get to dictate. In fact, he thinks it ought to be him, gets to dictate how corporate America operates, and he's bragged about that. And I think that's the issue. He doesn't think he's destroying something. He thinks he would much rather live in a totalitarian system with him at the top.
Wow. So what you're describing basically is an evil person. That's how I would label him, what you describe.
Well, I would say that his philosophy is in complete contradiction to the American way. And if we are going to continue to have a country in which the people rule, the people decide what the rules are, and not unelected Wall Street billionaires, then BlackRock is going to have to be brought to heel. I'm glad to say we're seeing a number of states help towards that end.
Yes, and that's how I wanted to finish up, because that is the optimistic note here, that there have been movements in several states, all Republican dominated, I believe, to push back on BlackRock and remove investments from their portfolios. What do you see taking place on that stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I answer, I just want to note, people hear about BlackRock. They've got all this money, they got all this power. And I think there's a tendency to become nihilistic or fatalistic. There's nothing that can be done. I just want to start with some hope here. This is a David versus Goliath story, no doubt, but remember how that story went. And that's how this story is going now. Because everything that BlackRock is doing is a house of cards built on a breach of fiduciary duty. I believe I can get into this, but it's a breach of our antitrust laws here in the United States. And I think it's securities fraud at a certain level. And increasingly, you're seeing state elected officials in every branch. And, the legislature, the attorney generals, the governors are taking action and the treasurers are taking action to push back against this, to call this out. You've seen treasurers divesting billions of dollars from BlackRock. You've seen state legislatures pass laws that say if you're going to breach the fiduciary duty when you manage our pension funds, you're not going to get our pension funds anymore. And so there's a huge wave of pension fund divestments that are now on autopilot. It's launched a matter of when these contracts come up. They're going to be divesting from BlackRock. And I'll end on probably the most important thing. You've had attorneys generals launch multiple investigations against BlackRock, both for their breach of the fiduciary duty, but also the fact that they collude with other companies. We didn't really get into this, but they collude with other asset managers to team up against these corporations, these corporate management teams, to say, hey, if you don't do what we say you ought to do, we'll replace your boards of directors, we'll replace you. Well, in America, you tell me, when business owners get together, okay, and collude and decide, we're going to restrict the supply of a good or service from coming to market, that's an antitrust violation. And so increasingly, you're seeing more and more scrutiny on those types of arrangements, especially as it pertains to BlackRock. So they are in retreat. You're watching them walk away from the term ESG. Larry Fink, just a few months ago at the Aspen Ideas Festival, admitted that he's ashamed that he's been brought into this conversation, that Larry Fink and BlackRock have been brought into this conversation, and he's going to drop the word ESG. Now, he basically says he's going to rebrand and call himself a conscientious capitalist. So we have to focus on his actions, not his words. But my point is, the momentum is on our side. Consumers should feel exceedingly empowered right now. I am so impressed with what's happened in the U.S. markets just here in the last 6 to 9 months. Look at what consumers are doing to Budweiser and to Target and these companies that feel the need to poke them in the eye and attack the values that have made this country great. I mean, they are bringing these companies to heel, and BlackRock is being brought to heel. So we should absolutely end on a high note. Consumers should feel empowered, and optimistic about the future.
That's awesome. And that's a much needed message. And just really quickly, depending on how the White House race goes for 2024, let's just say Donald Trump is back in the White House, or at least a Republican. Do you see further federal actions being taken to, as you point out, bring BlackRock to heel?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, if Donald Trump or any Republican that I've seen on that's running for the nomination takes the White House, BlackRock is going to be in a world of hurt. There are FTC, Federal Trade Commission actions that I would predict. There are DOJ actions that I would predict. There are SEC actions that I would predict. They are going to they better double, quadruple, quintuple their legal budget, because it is going to rain down on them. And you're already seeing the two newest Republican nominees to the Federal Trade Commission are two fantastic nominees who I believe care deeply about these issues. And so I would expect that if we are in a Republican administration in the next admin, BlackRock is going to be in for a world of hurt.
Wow, that is really good news, what you just detailed. I want to thank you for that, because, I've watched with alarm, like many Americans, BlackRock's growing influences, and it is a little dark and despairing, but what you just outlined is definitely cause for cheer. Will Hild, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Wow, subtitle this, The Dying Days of BlackRock. Consumer power. Isn't that a great note? Isn't that a great note of optimism upon which to focus going forward in America with Joe Biden still at the helm, sadly? I want to thank you for listening and remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, bwashingtontimes.com, where you can also subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter, C Real Life Network, the faith-based news outreach of Pastor Jack Hibbs's church in California, and the Anywhere podcasts are offered. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.